Good day, Will. First of all, let me thank you for agreeing to do this video interview with me today over Zoom.
Guy, it's always a pleasure to speak with you.
For our audience, could you please give us a bit of an overview about your professional background before we get into covering your new book?
Sure. So I'm Will Thalheimer, and my career began, before I got into the professional world or the world of learning and development. I spent some time. I worked in mental health. I worked with adolescents who had cognitive challenges. Then I worked with some adults who had severe cognitive issues. I was also a short order cook, and I tried to sell vacuum cleaners. I did a bunch of stuff like that. Oh, and I worked in an insurance company in a room that was 2 football fields long, and I handled health claims from their clients. And I was not very good at that. Most of those things I wasn't very good at. So then I got into the field I was working on my MBA, and as part of my MBA program, I was doing some simulation development, or I was trying to. And I looked through Training Magazine at the time, and I was looking for a company that sort of combined business stuff and simulation stuff and learning. And there it was on the page, the world leaders in business simulation. And it was the strategic management group. I put on my one suit. I went down there the next day. They were 4 blocks from my house. I couldn't believe it. And went down there the next day, said, I want to work for you guys. And they go, whoa, too busy today, come back tomorrow. So anyway, I got a job there, and I was an instructional designer. I was a project manager. We built an MBA in a box kind of thing, multimedia. So audio tape, 5 1/4-inch floppy disk with a simulation on it, workbooks, etc. But that was a lot of fun. I became a project manager. We built simulations at the time, the first sort of commercially viable leadership simulation, which was great. A lot of fun. We made a lot of mistakes. And then at some point I said, I want to do more. And so I went and got my PhD at Columbia University, Teachers College, Human Learning and Cognition. I loved it so much. I spent 8 years there. Racked up student debts, which I didn't pay off till I was 60. Oh man, that's another story. So then I went back. They recruited me again. I led the leadership development product line, leading for business results for SMG. And then I decided to go out on my own. And for 22 years, I led work learning research. It sounds like a big consulting firm, but it was basically me. And just had a great time trying to translate the research, help companies build more effective learning interventions based on the research. Along the way, I got involved in learning evaluation as well.
Well, thank you for that interview. I learned something new, and I have to ask this question because I may share this in common. Was the vacuum cleaner brand that you were selling Rainbow Rexair?
Oh my gosh, it was Rainbow.
We'll have to talk about that at some other time, because I have a story or two to tell about that as well. But we're here to talk about your new book, which is really the second edition of a previous book. And this one is Performance-Focused Learner Surveys Using Distinctive Questioning to Get Actionable Data and Guide Learning Effectiveness. Yes. Thank you for holding that up. I have my copy here right handy in case you didn't have that, but I wouldn't expect that. So let's focus here on your book now. So my 3-part question for you is, who did you write it for? Why did you write it? And what do you hope the takeaways are for the reader?
Who did I write it for? I wrote it for learning professionals. And I think of those folks broadly. First, it could be workplace learning professionals like me. but also people can find value in it who are teachers, who are educators. And also, I will say this, that the questioning method, which was, people have encouraged me, said, Will, you got to come up with a name for your method of these questions. And so I struggled with that for many years, but finally I came up with the term distinctive questioning. And I think the distinctive questioning approach has uses in other areas as well. So, for example, I've been asked to help people with employee exit surveys. Recently, people said, well, what about engagement surveys? Yeah, they could be relevant for that too. So, but generally, my focus was on the training and development field. So that's sort of the primary audience. What was the next question?
So why did you write it? But I guess that question is, why did you feel the need to update the first edition to the second edition?
Okay. Well, that's really two questions. So I wrote the book. I'm a learning research guy. And my belief is that, obviously we should look at the research to design our learning interventions. They have good ideas. The research is never perfect. It's always a ongoing system where we're trying to improve things over time. But in general, there's some really good recommendations from learning research. But as I was, doing the work that we do, I realized that, well, that's good. That's a great start. But if we don't have good feedback loops, if we're not learning from what we're doing, then we're not professionals, right? That's what you do. You put out your best product, you evaluate it, you keep what's really good and you improve what needs to be better. So that's sort of my mindset. And then I came across this research that was blew me away. A meta-analysis showed that traditional smile sheets were virtually uncorrelated with learning results. I go, whoa. And so I asked myself, well, can we make them better? And obviously I wrote a book on it. So the answer is yes. So I think it's really critical. And it's probably the number one thing we do to measure learning, to measure our effectiveness, to get feedback. And the ones that I saw that were out there, completely ineffective, just poorly designed, didn't really take into account some of the research on cognitive biases and things. And so it's also a good starting point for getting involved in learning evaluation, is to upgrade your learner survey. So really important topic, and nobody else had done it. So I thought it was about time. And the third question was?
Well, but you updated the book here in the in 2016?
Yeah, first edition was February 2016. You always remember your first book. And then, I was out there using these methods with clients, and I was involving with them in pilot tests. And we're seeing results, and they were giving me feedback, and I was learning. So I learned a ton over the years, and decided that the book needed an upgrade. I actually have a section in the very beginning of the book. So what's new in the second edition? So I doubled the number of candidate questions. These are the questions that people can use if they want to. You shouldn't use them all. I'm not saying that, but there's more options in the book. I literally improved the wording of every question. They're all improved. Maybe one is the same. I added chapters on open-ended questions, on how to tailor your questions, how to get better response rates, which is a big struggle we have. So a lot of additions, and basically, just if evaluation's about improvement, I improved. The second edition is improved.
Very good. Thank you for that. So specifically, what do you hope the reader takes away? I mean, you've got this battery of questions that they can pull from to formulate their own evaluation instruments. But what else? Well, take away?
First of all, I want them to be a little bit concerned with the current methods they're probably using. I want them to be a little scared about that. And I take them through what the research shows and take them through some practical examples of problems that these things cause. And then I want to give them hope, right? So we get fearful, and then we say we need to change, and then well, how do we do it? So I take them through a process. I give them a process. I give them rationale. I give them really background. I don't believe in recipes. I mean, recipes are fine, but they're not good enough because people need to make changes. They need to tailor things. They need to think on their own. They might have different circumstances. So really wanted to cover some of the fundamentals so that people knew how to think about these questions that we're asking. So really, I want to provide a full, complete handbook of how to use these things, how to persuade others that they're good, how to have conversations with stakeholders, how to create numeric data on these things. Just really give them the whole package is what I was hoping for.
Well, good. Well, let's kind of do a flyby of the whole package then. Now, I read this book so that I could write a review for you, but that was way back last August. I had to check this morning to see when was that exchange. And I read the second edition, and I gave you a quote for you to use in the book here. But so my memory, since I've not used it, I've kind of maybe lost it a little bit. So if you can walk us through in any manner that you like to give the audience a feel for, what are you covering in this book that we haven't already discussed?
Sure.
Go through this.
All right. Well, I guess I'll go through it chapter by chapter, and I'll cover some of the highlights. How's that?
Good.
All right. So chapter 1 is why learner surveys, and I have a list there of 20 reasons to use learner surveys, and I divide those into 5 categories. So I'll just share with you what the categories are. Supporting learning design effectiveness, supporting learners in learning and application, nudging action through stealth messaging, supporting relationships, and maintaining organizational credibility. And we're going to probably have a conversation to drill down on these as we go through the rest of the book. I will say there's also one section of chapter 1 which I'm particularly fond of. It's titled "Learning Measurement is Pure Sex." Hey, would you like me to read that a little?
Well, if you must, go ahead.
All right. So let me start this book by saying that learning measurement is pure sex. With titillating foreplay, evaluation work begins before the main event with naked truth, powerfully useful data, and the dangerous rapture of the potential for new life. Evaluation feedback gives birth to learning, innovation, and improvement. Seriously, learning measurement is one of the most important topics in learning and development, not only because most learning measurement is frustratingly impotent, but more pointedly because simple improvements can help us take back control of our learning outcomes and learning designs.
Well, thank you. So
no,
moving right along there, let's cover the next, but your next chapter title here, I don't know where we're going here on this.
All right. Well, the next chapter title, I have to apologize to my mom for this, but I just wanted to be really clear that, so here's the chapter title: Your Smile Sheets Suck. And I go into that in depth. I talk about the research. I talk about, sort of holding an autopsy for our smile sheets. In fact, let me just read you this. By the way, the only reason I'm reading this is because at an ISPI conference, I once did the poetry of smile sheets, and people loved it. And so I think maybe your audience will like it as well. So let me draw on Charles Dickens to imbue my next point with a bit of gravitas. Today, I declare to the entire world that the traditional smile sheet is dead. It was dead to begin with. There is no doubt whatever about that. Let me register its burial with the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourners. Let me sign my name to it. The traditional smile sheet is dead as a doornail. Anyway. So I already talked about the meta-analyses that showed that, or the first one. And then there was another one that showed the exact same scene. They showed that smile sheets were correlated with learning results at 0.09. Anything below 0.30 is a weak correlation. And there's been other ones. There's ones in the healthcare space. There's ones in the university teaching. So this is sort of a common phenomenon that our traditional smile sheets are just not correlated with learning results. And so then they give us false information. So basically, if you get high marks in your smile sheets, you could have a well-designed course, but almost equally a poorly designed course. If you get low marks in your smile sheets, you could have a poorly designed course, but almost equally likely a well-designed course. There's a famous story about this by a guy you know, Neil Rackham.
Chevalier?
Neil Rackham.
Oh, Neil Rackham. Yes, he's got one. Yes.
So Neil was called into this company. Neil was a world famous, did research on the sales process. He was the guy that discovered that you're successful as a salesperson, not to the extent that you can close the deal, but to the extent that you understand your client, you understand their needs, you have conversations about those. And so he was sort of world famous, wrote the book Spin Selling, and he was called into companies to talk about sales. And this one time, this company called him in and they said, Neil, while you're here, we'd love to show you our new sales training methodology. We think it's great. And they even said, listen, you know, what we've done is we've rank ordered all our sales trainers based on their smile sheet ratings. And in fact, there's these two guys down at the bottom and we're thinking of firing them. So Neil, you want to take a look? Neil said, yeah. And said, you know, do you mind if I look a little deeper? And I'm going to make a long story short here. He did look deeper and he decided to rank order those sales trainers, not on smile sheet ratings, but on the performance of their trainees in selling. Wow, like remarkable. And those two trainers who were at the bottom on the smile sheets were at the top. Why? Because they use more rigorous training methods. They help people deal with objections. They gave them practice. And the learners felt less confident and didn't feel as good. And so they didn't rate the training as highly, but they were much better sales trainers. So another example of how the traditional smile sheet can send us off in the wrong direction.
Roger Chevalier has a story, the late Roger Chevalier has a story of doing the same thing. He went to work for one of the big real estate companies and took over their training organization. And he was supposed to get rid of 10 trainers because they wanted to reduce their force. And they had those people identified. And he went and looked and found the same thing. They were perceived to be so hard on their students that the students gave them lousy remarks. But those students then turned out to be the best real estate agents in their entire system. So again, wow. It just proves that same point there.
Yeah, that's great. Is that story written up somewhere?
It is. I will send you a link to that, and I'll actually put it in the show notes too. And I'll look for the one on Rackham because I had forgotten about that one.
Oh yeah, I'll send you that one. I can send.
Okay.
You. All right, so that's chapter 2. Your smile sheets suck. Chapter 3 is on measuring effectiveness, and it's one of 3 chapters. Really, what I say in the book is a good learner survey does 3 things. It gauges the effectiveness of the training design. It enables reporting that is actionable, and it sends messages that nudge action. So chapter 3 is about the first one, gauging the effectiveness of training design. In that chapter, I share the learning maximizers model. That's the 8 goals you ought to have when you're designing training. I share the decisive dozen, which is a dozen things based on learning research that we should be building into our learning designs. And then from those things, I sort of simplify it into four things, the four pillars of training effectiveness. And I do that because I'm going to use that as an index for the questions that we write. So the first pillar is, do the learners understand? Do they comprehend? Number two, do they remember? Are they going to remember what they learned? Number three, are they motivated to apply what they've learned? And number four, are they going to get after training supports? And based on those four pillars, we're really, aiming at those effect. We're really able to index the effectiveness. So that's chapter 3. Chapter 4 is about producing actionable results. And the whole idea here is that we got to start by asking good questions. And let me go to page 46 here and sort of read off what some of these concerns are. So one thing we might want to do is to remind learners of the learning experience. Now, after a full day workshop, some things are top of mind, probably the things you were just taught, probably the things early in the morning, but you're a little fuzzy in between. So that's good. You want to help the learners make good decisions on your smile sheets. That's one way to do it. Remind them about the learning, increased learner attention. Right? When they're going through the smile sheet, you've probably seen this in the old days, people would circle the same number down the smile sheet. They're not paying attention. They're just going real quick. Avoid biasing questions. There's a lot of bias in the way we use Likert scales. You give somebody a statement, and that statement already biases them. We want to avoid that. Ask clear and relevant questions. Ask questions that learners can answer knowledgeably. There's questions on smile sheets, like, how much revenue do you think your company will increase on based on this course that you took? And, learners have no idea on that. In very specific cases they might, but not usually. And number 6, provide descriptive and easily understood answer choices. So avoid things like strongly, like the Likert scales, strongly agree and agree. They're too fuzzy. They let bias creep in. They don't give learners a way to wrap their heads around the answer choices. And also there's another option to provide follow-up learner surveys. So not right after learning, but when people have had a chance to implement things in their work. And I really also emphasize 3 things. Don't transform your results into numbers. And I sort of break that rule later, but in the book, but in general, don't do that. What happens is we use the Likert scale and we put numbers on those, which you're not really allowed to do. And then you get an average. My course is a 4.1. And then all the numbers we get are between 3.8 and 4.5, and we're paralyzed, we're stuck, we don't know what to do. So not great. Avoid meaningless answer choice labels like strongly agree, etc. And delineate standards. And this is a new concept that really I've added. Delineate standards for each answer choice. So you have a question like, here's a question. Now that you've completed the learning experience, how well do you feel you understood the concepts taught? And the first choice might be, I am still at least somewhat confused about the concepts. And the standard that I recommend in the book is, that's alarming. If somebody goes through your course and they still are confused, that's alarming. The next choice is, I am somewhat familiar with the concepts. That's unacceptable. I have a solid understanding, that's acceptable. And then you can go to superior, etc. Now these choices in the book, I recommend for each question, I recommend these, but I say, whatever you do, don't use my standards. And what I mean by that is, it's a great opportunity to negotiate within your learning team and with your key stakeholders. But these standards are really valuable because they prevent bias. What typically happens is you get a number, 4.1, then you decide, well, is that good or bad? And you don't know what it means. So here we're sort of deciding in advance. So that is chapter 4, and got a whole long list, 16 things to do there. And then finally, I added this chapter, chapter 5. It's called Sending Messages to Nudge Action. And this is really an important concept, and really it's hard to wrap our head around. Typically we think, well, we're going to evaluate to get data. Great, but we can evaluate for other reasons. And our long-term goal of getting data is so we can make better decisions and take better actions. But getting data is not the only way to make better decisions and take action. There's another thing we can do, and that's nudge behavior. So we might have a question on like after training follow through. By having that question in our survey, we're sending a message, we're nudging action. We're saying, oh, whoa, you mean training's not the only thing? Maybe maybe a manager should be involved. Maybe the instructor should be involved. Maybe we should have job aids. I'll tell you a story that's in the book. I love this story. Ian Blake worked for Tetra Pak over in Sweden, and he wanted to introduce these new type of questions to their training. And he's a smart guy, and he knew about sort of change management and, you know, managing stakeholders and things. So he invited the subject matter expert trainers, not all of them, but a few of them, into his office one at a time, and said, hey, here's the new questions that I'm proposing we use. Please give me feedback on them before we actually roll them out. And to a question about follow-up, he had tailored the question, which I recommend, by the way. And he added this choice. And this is what the learners would say, or the learners had an option to choose. I will be added to my instructor's Yammer group to reinforce the learning and discuss things with my fellow learners after the learning event. And this one subject matter expert trainer came in and said, that Yammer, you know, and gave him all the questions. Said, what do you think? That Yammer thing, that's ridiculous. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard. What, take that out of it. And Ian thanked him, you know, for his thing. This guy was a little bit over the top about that Yammer thing. But the very next day, this guy gets back to Ian and says, you know what? I was thinking about that Yammer option. I think that's a brilliant idea. I'm going to now add Yammer to all my workshops that I teach. Now think about that. This learner survey had never been deployed. No learner had ever answered it. No data had been collected, and yet it had a positive benefit. So that's what chapter 5 is all about. Chapter 6 is simply a set of, it's sort of a learning survey question quiz. So I've introduced you to the concepts, and I say, okay, now tell me whether you think this question is good, this question is bad, etc. I have 6 questions on that, and I give you feedback. It's a lot of fun. Chapter 7 is the list of candidate questions. And I have about 25 questions in there, and index them based on the 4 pillars of training effectiveness, and just go through each question. Also, I don't just present them, but I also talk through them a little bit and talk about the rationale. In fact, some of the questions in there I don't recommend that you use, but I add them so that you can think about them. And then chapter 8 is special purpose questions. So I have a question in there about it's a question about the questions. So you ask the learners, you say something like, hey, we're using a new type of question on our learner surveys. We want to know what you think about these before we deploy them more widely, and we give them choices. And I actually used this question in 2 large organizations as a pilot test. And the learners said, in all different types of courses, so soft skills, hard skills, etc. And 80% of the learners liked the new questions better than the old questions. 90% like the new questions better or equal to the old questions. So it's a great question to, you know, sometimes we get resistance when we push for change. Adding these type of questions may be a change. It's a great way to sort of satisfy your stakeholders. Because one of their things I've always get asked, well, Will, don't you think the learners won't like these new type of questions on there? I always thought, that's crazy. You think they like the Likert scale questions? I mean, so anyway, there's questions like that. There's questions on, conference learning. There's questions on self-study learning. There's questions on, there's a question on belongingness, related to our DEI kind of efforts. There's a question about values. I was working with a large global not-for-profit, and they're very concerned about their values. They're a values-driven organization, and they wanted to have a question in there about whether the training sort of reflected the values of the organization. So I crafted a question like that. These type of questions, and obviously I can't write every question in here, or every question that you might want. But, I hope people can take this and feel free to tailor things and create their own questions based on what they want to know. So that was chapter 8, special purpose questions. Chapter 9 is comment questions or open-ended questions. I sort of neglected those in the first edition of the book, but they're really important. And just one thing I talk about in that chapter, chapter 9, is that you can use comment questions with your choice questions. So you give a choice question and then you give a comment question right after it. You don't want to do that all the time because it's overload, but it's really valuable. The choice question gives you a sense of clarity and can create urgency. And then the open-ended, the comment question can give you some richness and really understanding. So I like that a lot for really important questions, but don't do it on every one. Chapter 10 is on tailoring your questions. A lot of people come, Will, we want to use the same questions, the exact same words on every course. And there's some value to that. But you're really not going to be able to compare a course on anti-sexual harassment versus a course on Microsoft Excel. It's just it's kind of apples and oranges. So don't even think about that. It's better to be more precise with your questions, with your wording. And it's more motivating to the learners and they can wrap their head around it. And we're trying to get them to think clearly. So like that. Chapter 11 is on follow-up learner surveys. So, a lot of what we do is we give our learner surveys during the learning or right after it, but you can also do it 2 to 4 to 5 weeks later. There's a sort of some slightly different questions we can ask. I talk about using a pivot question. So, hey, did you put this skill into practice in your work? No, and I doubt I will. No, but I probably will. No, but I have a plan to. Yes, I did. I put it into practice. And then you can pivot. If they answered positively, you can say, what were the success factors? What enabled you to do this? If you answered negatively, any of the no choices, well, what were your obstacles? What got in your way? You can use that to redesign your learning, number one, but also make mid-course corrections. It's sort of a great way to say, hey, like I had one client I did this with. It was a workshop that I taught, and I used this method. And they got back to me and said, Will, what motivated me about the course was my managers really like this, and the team was going to use it, so I wanted to use it. And in terms of whether they believed in it or whether they were self-motivated, very low scores. So I was able to go back to management and say, hey, if you want them to continue, you need to keep riding them. You need to keep motivating them. So a really good way to do mid-course correcting. And then chapter 12 is motivating learners to respond. Wow. A big problem. We've got survey fatigue. And so in this chapter, I have lists of, the first list is how to get better responses and higher response rates. I got 17 ways to do that. And then options for making a personal appeal, another 8 ideas, special instructions for online surveys, et cetera, et cetera. And then I ask a question, what about incentives? What about incentives? I think I'll just let people buy the book to get answer to that. I never tried that before. You think it'll work, Guy?
Sure it will.
Chapter 13, presenting learner survey results. So it's not enough to collect the data. We have to present it in a way that's going to be useful. I take you through how to do that. And then chapter 14 is making it happen. And this really recognizes that this is a change initiative. And so I give people arguments to make. I give people ways to think about this, to implement it. And then chapter 15, almost done, measuring learner perceptions in other ways. So I talk about the options of focus groups, structured interviews, online whiteboarding, and combining those methods as well. A lot of time, people come up to me and say, Will, I don't need no damn smile sheet. What I do is I talk to my learners after the course, and they really tell me what they really feel. And I'm like, yeah, they're going to tell you some stuff, but they're not going to tell you everything. And why not use a survey first and then do that, if you're going to do that kind of thing. So there's some biases we have, people using, it's kind of interesting. Smile sheets, it's come to be a derogatory term. In the first edition of my book, I actually titled the book Performance Focused Smile Sheets. I was hoping to reclaim the term smile sheets to make it positive. I failed. So the second edition of the book is Performance Focused Learner Surveys. But I do think there's a danger in discounting smile sheets. And I will say this, that I recommend at least 30 times in the book, don't just do learner surveys. But they are a really good way to get feedback. They're easy, the easiest thing to get started with. If you get a learning team or an organization doing better learner surveys, it's sort of a gateway drug to more learning evaluation stuff. So.
Well, this is embarrassing here. I ran out of time on my free Zoom account, and Will and I reconnected, and we did the last chapter of the book and then kind of wrapped it up. And it's only now that I realize that I forgot to hit the record button. So performance-focused learner surveys, second edition here. The final chapter is on LTEM, the big picture of learning evaluation. And what we talked about is this 8-tiered model for evaluations. And he included this in this particular edition of the book because he wanted to make sure that the written level 1 surveys, the smile sheets as they used to be called, is not the end all of evaluations. And so he wanted to include that in that. So in our show notes, we're going to have some links to some of the posts that he's done in the past where you can get the LTEM evaluation and the explanation of it and some other resources. But my apologies to Will, but I didn't want to reconnect with him and force him to do the last part of our video together. The mistake is all mine. My apologies. Cheers, everyone.